they're building the building on to our water sewer plant up in Ketchum.
Right.
And they have the underground portion of the tank. They, of course, poured it and put the lid on.
Okay.
And then that was going to have a secondary tank above it.
So they sealed it. They sealed it.
So it had one entrance. It was their construction entrance, and a guy's down there with a saw, gas-powered saw.
Mm-hmm. Enclosed space. Yep.
Yep. Remember that? Were you there?
When was that?
I don't know, 15 years ago.
Okay.
And his buddy happened to go down and check on him, and he couldn't figure out why the saw had been idling so long, and he's laying on the ground, and they drug him out. He was really sick.
Okay.
Unconscious.
Semi-conscious or unconscious?
Kind of semi-conscious.
Okay.
They flew him over to Pocatello, where they have a chamber.
And just, was there only one person exposed, or could there have been other people in there with him?
The guys that went, no, he was the only one in there cutting.
Right.
The other guys that went in there,
right,
didn't feel so good either.
Co-workers. So did you have any? You had no way to really evaluate them though at that time. Did you transport all of them, or just the one patient?
Just the one.
Okay.
I didn't have anything back then.
So that's a good example of where it could be used on rescuers or people that went into an environment to rescue somebody who we don't really know what their exposure level is. Because if you had 1,000 parts per million in there, which I suspect is probably pretty high after a while, those people could have been fairly high levels of CO as well.
We had a multiple during the winter. I can't remember.
Christmas.
Christmas Day. We had about 2 or 3 people and a couple of dogs.
Yeah.
Indian
3 years ago.
I had one person out Indian Creek. Okay.
This is outrageous.
Now, did all of these calls get called out as a carbon monoxide call, or did they get called out as a sick person?
This one, I think, came out as a carbon, or, well, I don't know.
Was that Dr.
We were all thinking carbon monoxide.
Because there was multiple patients.
Yeah.
But on your call, you're saying no, it was not, which doesn't surprise me. Because most CO calls are not called in as CO calls.
Well, so we have CO monitors on our jump bags.
Very good, yeah.
And we did have a call just a couple winters ago of a really sick lady.
Right.
And the husband had called it in.
And
as they walked in, the alarm sounded, the house was full of
Oh, wow. So what did the call come in as?
sick lady.
Yeah. So that's the whole point. Really, half the point of this training is to just consider the uses of this new tool is really amazing, because now you can proactively screen everybody for carbon monoxide. Everybody that you monitor will now be screened for CO. And I forgot to introduce myself. So I'm Steve. I work with Masimo. Masimo is the world leader in pulse oximetry. We're in 44 countries. The EMS team is 11 people, and the hospital team is like 3,000 people. So just salespeople in general. I do some clinical training as well. I've been here 12 years. I used to work in New York City in probably the busiest unit in the entire city in the South Bronx in the 80s. So I've been to a lot of medical calls and a lot of fires. So, and we never checked for CO. I mean, it was not even on my mind. There were so many people that were exposed to CO, and I never even, because we had no way to measure it, so I never really thought about it. And the hospitals don't think about it either. So now New York City has 250 Rad 57s. They actually had Philips, which didn't have this technology that Zoll has. And they measure every firefighter after every single second alarm or greater. Not on all hands or something, usually not. But the companies, they have them so they can test each other themselves. The best type of rehab, and half the reason why you have it is probably for yourselves, I'm guessing, for rehab, because it is an NFPA standard to measure carbon monoxide. It was added in 2011, and it became mandated in 2014. And it's because, what does smoke do to us? What are the 2 biggest killers of firefighters? What's number 1?
Heart attack.
It's not number 1. Cancer is number 1. Number 2 is heart attack, and what's number 3? Which would maybe surprise you, but in the big cities it doesn't surprise people. Take a guess what 3 is.
Transport. Getting hit by a car.
No. I used to think it was motor vehicle accidents.
COPD?
It's suicide.
Oh,
Suicide's the 3rd highest. And cancer, we used to say heart disease first. It's always been cancer, but we've never really associated cancer with firefighters. And now it's very well proven. There's a captain in one station that all three captains in the same station in this city, all of their kids from the 3 different shifts all have the same exact cancer. So that's very suspicious. I don't think it's a coincidence. So the Zoll monitor with carbon monoxide allows you to measure it proactively. Just examples. And when I came here 11 years ago, I didn't think it was a big problem. I know it is just because I hear stories from different departments. Like Meridian Fire, this was a long time ago, actually. They had a fire, or maybe it was a CO, it might have been a CO leak. I think it was a CO leak, actually. And they had duplexes, and does carbon monoxide go through drywall?
Yeah.
Goes right through it, right, exactly. It's almost even to the level of air as well, so it doesn't rise like smoke. So they had a duplex, and it was like 2 in the morning, and luckily nobody died. There were sick people. Maybe there were CO alarms going off, I don't know, they may not have been. And they were knocking on the door next door, and the guy was belligerent at 2 in the morning. He says, "Why the hell are you knocking on my door?" And fire department says, "Fire department, we want to check you out." And the guy says, "I'm fine." And he shut the door on him. And they knocked again, and they said, "Do you mind if we check you out?" And they have the technology to measure carbon monoxide. And his level was 24%. And this measures percent in the blood. It's not parts per million. That's a high level. That's a moderate to high level of exposure. He seemed reasonably okay. But that's what people do. They say they don't want to go to the hospital. He didn't want to go. They convinced him to go, and he did go. And they ended up. He spent the night in the hospital. And honestly, they said if we didn't have the ability to measure it, we probably would have just RMA'd him, or we just would have went to the next door. They would have just ignored him. So use this as a tool to rule in CO where maybe either not suspected or in an MCI. If I didn't have the machines and I went to a house and there was like 15 people there, say it was a party or something, I would take everyone in the hospital because you really don't know by looking at them. Are we ever going to see cherry red skin? No. And what are the symptoms of CO poisoning?
Usually kind of more of a flu-like, a headache,
nausea.
feeling well,
Okay.
tired,
Right.
yeah.
Or maybe, how about chest pain? What does CO do? What is the CO actually doing to your body?
Depriving you of oxygen.
Correct. It's depriving you of oxygen. And why is it depriving you of oxygen? What is it actually doing?
Displacing the
on the
Displacing it, right. And
All
it's
four of them.
because CO has a higher affinity to hemoglobin than oxygen, 200 times. So where do those oxygens go, by the way? When it kicks, if you have a bus with people on the bus and it's a full bus and suddenly carbon monoxide gets on, it kicks off those seats. Where do those people go that were in the seats? What happens to them? Do they just disappear? They actually flow through your bloodstream. They stay in your bloodstream as free radicals. At that point, they're considered a free radical. That's what causes damage. That is your damage. That's your heart damage. That's your Parkinson's disease. It's not cancer. It's not directly linked to cancer. But smoke is directly linked to cancer, and exhaust can be linked to cancer. So it's guilty by association. So what we're doing for firefighters is saying we don't want free radicals. We want to be able to off-gas those free radicals, and oxygen will do that. High flow O2, CPAP is really good. You should get clearance from your medical director. I'm sure. Do you have a protocol yet for CO? Because I can send you some examples. Most medical directors just copy the other ones. They're all, they're all the same thing, but they're just written a little different and signed with a different signature. But honestly, it's a really good thing to have one. What I gave you today, these little cards, that will be hopefully at some point, maybe in your Zoll devices, will give you a guideline, but it's not a protocol. So we can't tell you how to treat a patient. Just to get these done and printed through our legal department was a miracle. I think if they saw this now, they'd probably revoke this because they don't want us telling you what to do. So levels in the blood, and by the way, just missed CO. The incidence is 50%. It's really high. Farmington, New Mexico. I'll tell you a different story. So after training, I've done a lot of training. We start to get stories after training. It's the weirdest thing. But we had a class in, it was somewhere in Texas. I forget the town. But anyway, they got trained, and then the next day they had to call an urgent care center for somebody who wasn't feeling well. And going back on the symptoms, by the way, we mentioned flu-like symptoms. But as we just talked about, it robs you of oxygen, right? Somebody said it robs you of oxygen. So chest pain is very common. Because think about it, if your heart gets hypoxic, it starts to hurt. Same thing with CVA or stroke-like symptoms. Very common. So remember, just because it's chest pain doesn't mean it's not a heart. It could be CO, it could be CVA, it could be CO poisoning. I've heard a lot of those stories. But back on the story, they had to call an urgent care center. Do you guys have any doc in the boxes here in Haley? And they want, not yet? Okay.
One's coming.
All right. So they got a call for the doc in the box for a person. It was a fairly, it's like a 27-year-old that looked really sick. And they said, we want this guy to go to the hospital for further evaluation. I could see that happening here. You're going to take him off the street. And the guy who got off the engine said, "Hey, Captain, do you want me to grab the RAD 57? Because this department had RADs, not the Zolls. It's the same thing." And the captain said, hell no. Just because you had training in the morning doesn't mean you need to bring this thing in the afternoon. So they listened. Yes, okay, we won't bring it in. So they got in there and they evaluated the patient, and the captain said, well, just tell me, what were you doing today? And the guy says, I'm a plumber and I was under a house welding some pipes. And the captain went, ooh. So he said, no, he didn't tell, he was too proud. He says, okay, he kind of turned around and walked out quietly and grabbed the Rad 57. So he went in, the level was like 27% on this guy. He had super high levels of CO. And they brought the doctor in and said, hey, did this ever occur to you? And the doctor says, no, we never would have thought of it. So this is the type of thing you don't want to miss it. I've heard stories from cars, MBAs. Of course, wintertime is going to be more prevalent, but it can happen in the middle of summer. A lot of cases happen in the summer, more so in rural areas. I live in Boulder and I have a place in Utah, and I get more stories from the small towns because it's the older homes, it's fireplaces, it's wood stoves, and they're more, especially with elevation, you're more, you had a huge storm here, was it 3 years ago when you had like 35 inches in Haley? I can guarantee you people were getting poisoned by carbon monoxide. I'm sure some of those vents were blocked. Were any of you on any of those calls? I bet there were some, maybe some that we don't know about. But it's common with heavy storms. So percentages in the blood. Your machine is going to measure a percent in the blood. And the nice thing about Zoll is it displays on the display constantly. It's there. It doesn't circle back and forth like the old ones did. So you'll be able to see the levels every time you measure a patient. And it's percent in the blood, so I'll just go over the percentages real quick. 0 to 5% is normal. It's not a high level. Smokers can be up to 10%, just to give you a reference. They're usually not that level. Some smokers are 0. It just depends on what you're smoking and how you're smoking, things like that. But 5 to 10% is considered slightly elevated. So if you went on a call and nobody was a smoker and everybody was reading 8 or 9%, and you had a CO leak or maybe the alarms were going off, it may raise my suspicion a little bit. I'm not necessarily going to drag them out and take them to the hospital, but it depends. If they have symptoms, treat them. Never treat the machine. But 10% or less, at 10%, the alarm actually goes off. These are set at 10. So that's considered abnormal. 10 to 20% is considered a light to moderate exposure. Over 20% is moderate to severe. 30% or higher is severe. So 20 to 30 would be like moderate to high level. 10 to 20 would be moderate.
Is there any correlation that, like, does anybody have sort of, if you're exposed to this many parts per million, this is probably what your percentage is going to be like? Or
good question.
Because when we go in with our little meters just on our jump bags, they read us parts per million.
Right. You know what it depends on? It depends on 3 things. There's 3 things to that formula. 1 is the parts per million. 2 is the time you were in the environment. And 3 is how often you breathe per minute. So if you've got kids get sicker quicker because they're breathing faster. Okay, that's mother of my colleague said my kids they can't wake them up. It's very common. I had a call from Farmington, New Mexico. They measure everyone for CO, and in the middle of the summer they had a kid that was having syncopal episode in a supermarket, and the ambulance crew wanted to just RMA her because she looked fine, and the alarm went off and said, hey, high level of CO. And it took them like 30 minutes. They traced it to a vehicle. And the mother started screaming and said, my kids have been sleeping in the back of the van all day. And the kids were unconscious, and they were at the dad's house. And they lived. But they never would have thought of CO. They would have just RMA'd this lady, and the lady would have went back in her car and probably killed everybody. So it's basically how often you breathe, parts per million, and the time-weighted average. So for firefighters in overhaul, you normally aren't wearing your SCBA. I'm assuming it depends, I guess.
We are.
You are wearing them.
We've been checking.
Oh, good.
Before we.
Okay. So even if you have low levels of CO, the problem is every time you pick a ceiling and every time you have any type of smoke, and even non-smoke, they're finding now the gases exist outside the smoke zone. So command being set up in front of the fire building, that may change because now they're finding hazardous gases even in the area outside the smoke. But and if you wear a 4-gas or you have a 4-gas when you're doing overhaul, you may find it goes up and down a lot. So, and you're working hard and breathing hard. So just be cognizant that you could still be getting exposed. And there's no way to avoid CO in your job, but you can mitigate it and at least identify it. If somebody's a high level and you have a headache or whatever, just measure yourself Put it in your rehab protocol. It should be standard. You know, every fire or every incident more than 30 minutes. It could be generators. It could be, you know, extrication. Are those generators or are they electric? I don't know.
We have electric now, which is nice.
So electric, even for her stool, is it electric?
Mm-hmm.
So there's no CO there. But you may have apparatus running.
Always.
Yeah.
Command staff, like, you know, a lot of times I'll see rehab being done in the back of an ambulance or on the step of an ambulance or the back of a truck. That's like not good. You know, but you have those jump bag monitors, so they go off.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what kind do you have? Do you know? Any idea what it is?
Just got new.
Just
ones.
curious.
Don't even know what they're called.
Yeah, I got poisoned from Salt Lake to Denver in my car. I like old Audis, and I have a 91. I still drive it. Believe it or not, it actually still leaks a little bit. I shouldn't be driving it. I carry a CO detector in the car, and it's actually at the shop right now getting fixed again for carbon monoxide. Oh, good. Okay. So I got poisoned, and I drove 8 hours in the winter. I lost my appetite and didn't feel good. That was it wasn't bad. I mean, I didn't know I had CO poisoning. I should have known, but I didn't. And this is before I knew I had a leak. And I woke up the next day and I felt fine. So I just assumed I had a headache too, and I never get headaches. I'm one of the rare people that maybe gets like one headache a year. So the next day I smelled exhaust in my car. I got lucky and said something's not right, and my mechanic found a leak. And I guarantee you I got poisoned that day. So percent in the blood, and so 0 to 5 is normal, 5 to 10 is slightly elevated, 10% or more will alarm, 20% or higher is moderate, 30% or higher is severe. People can be conscious at 20, 30%, like that guy Meridian. Think about it this, for every percent of CO in your blood, it's 1 less percent of oxygen. So think about somebody who sats at 98 and you are 10%. You're at 88. You may or may not notice that. It's not terrible. But if somebody normally sats at 90, you get the COPD patients that sat at 90 constantly or 88, and they get 5 or 7% CO in their blood, it's going to be worse for them. They may have symptoms. 20%, you've lost 20% of your oxygen. So you probably will have some symptoms. A lot of times people just don't want to tell you. The half-life in the blood, so you get called like the plumber guy, when was he doing the work? So it doesn't leave your blood very quickly. A lot of us used to think just take him outside and he'll be okay. It's about 24 hours to completely mitigate it. 5-hour half-life. It's 4 to 5 half-lives to get rid of anything.
What about in the hyperbaric chamber?
So hyperbaric chamber, believe it or not, you want to guess what the half-life is? It's pretty damn fast. 20 minutes.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Do you have a hyperbaric center somewhere near here?
Yes, we do.
Really?
Yeah, there's one here in town.
For wound care. It's usually for wound care. Will they actually take a 911 smoke inhalation? I mean,
no, because don't you have to have
from the hospital?
you have to have somebody in there.
yeah.
You have to have a caregiver in there, and I don't think
You
you
do.
can fit 2 people in.
Oh no, I don't.
Yeah, they have a big one.
They've got a big one.
They do. I don't think the caregiver has to be in the chamber.
Oh, I thought they did.
No, they just have to be monitoring it, I think.
Mhm.
But so they will take somebody. That's kind of cool. And it takes a while to get people in. Obviously, they're not there all the time. You have to, it'd probably take 40 minutes to get people in there, I'd imagine, at night. But you may want to check with them and make sure to say, hey, can you treat? If we bring you a patient that's had smoke inhalation, or, they're going to be at the hospital first because we got airway. That's number one. But so CO poisoning. Let's go with that one. Can we bring them here? A lot of these smaller centers don't like to treat those patients. You got to have a
Bill
physician.
treated Bill Freer on Danny's fire.
In the chamber. Is it a single chamber or
He's got
Wow.
both. He's got a
Five
single
off
and
thing.
how do you guys get so lucky and get one of those here? That's pretty cool.
He's an ex-diver.
Oh, okay. Right. So, God, when I used to work when I went to college, we had a helicopter land, and our Coast Guard helicopter they came in. I was working the street then, and they said we got a carbon monoxide poison. We had a chamber at our university, and the helicopter landed. The guy was DOA, they were doing CPR. He says, we can't help him. He doesn't need a chamber. He needs an emergency room. Freaking Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard guy was clueless, like, where do we go? And one of our guys jumped in the helicopter and navigated them to the hospital. Just like back in the 80s. Maybe they didn't have good radios back then. They could talk to anybody. But, okay, so treatment is high flow oxygen. The half-life is 5 hours. At oxygen, so if you give somebody oxygen, the half-life is only about 60 to 90 minutes. It's much quicker. So if you have an MCI with 30, 40, 50 patients, and none of them are overly symptomatic, say you have a couple that are very symptomatic, they're automatically going to go to the hospital. I don't care what their levels are. Say you've got 20 people that are not very symptomatic. If their levels are within reason, you may not transport them, you may treat them. So it's still going.
That's good.
So you may treat them because, you may not send them to the hospital. You don't really need, honestly, the hospital's not going to do anything different than what you do except for a blood gas. So you may be able to mitigate an MCI. We had an incident in Seattle on New Year's Eve. I had actually heard the 911 call for a cardiac arrest. It came in as a single patient. The guy was lethargic as all hell calling in. You couldn't understand. He was Indian. It was Microsoft employees having at Bellevue, Washington. They were having a party, and you could hear him say, "They're on the ground." He kept saying, "They're on the ground," but the dispatcher was tuning in on one person. And she says, "Is he breathing? Is he breathing?" And he says, "No, he's not breathing." So then she was coaching him on CPR. So they sent one ambulance and an MSO, which is their medical service officer. So they had like 3 or 4 people. And they got there, and there were 7 people laying on the ground, and they had beer bottles and all sorts of stuff. And it was a party, and there was music playing. The first thing they thought of was, hey, it's drug overdose. But within a couple minutes, they said, hey, wait a minute, this is not a drug overdose. And they brought the 4 gas in, and immediately they just pulled everybody out. And these guys almost died. There was 10 of them. Unconscious. They all went to the hyperbaric center. And the only guy that called, that lived, they all lived, but the only guy that actually was conscious enough to call does not remember one thing. He doesn't even know what happened. And they had no CO detectors. They had cars are killing people. The automatic key fobs. How many people drive cars that have a push to start button, right? So the older ones didn't have a safety, so if you went inside with your keys, it wouldn't turn off automatically. I think the newer ones turn off within 15 minutes. Do you know?
Mine is
10, okay. But some of them won't turn off. And it has automatic, and you can start your car too before you even get out to it. I think it's designed to like heat your car up or something. And these guys had pulled a car into the garage at 10 o'clock at night. And the guy, he says, I think I turned the car off. I mean, either he didn't turn it off, or maybe the button got hit again and the car started up again. And that's what happened in Bellevue. But what happened was they had the duplexes. So they had 40 people. And they luckily had 6 devices with CO. One device just won't cut it. And they ended up taking 10. 8 went to hyperbaric, 2 went to ER, and they had 20 to 30 that got treated unseen and not transported, which was really good because their levels weren't that high. So let me go back on Zoll. So I have until what, 6:15 or 6:30?
6:15, I think.
Okay, we'll be good. So the plus or minus accuracy, the error ratio, it's not perfect. It's damn good, but nothing's perfect. I mean, 12 leads aren't perfect. So just remember, you can get false positives. You might, never depend on one reading. I always take 3 if I'm suspicious. Things that will cause a false positive are motion might cause it, a lot of motion. SpO2 motion's fine with us. That's what we're known for, is motion, SpO2. That's why Masimo's on this device. But motion with carbon monoxide could cause a false alarm. The other thing is very small fingers. This is designed, I don't know how many, do you have the adult and the slender digit sensor, or just the one sensor, do you know?
I think we just have the one sensor.
So there are 2 sensors, and when you look at the sensor, you can stay there. I'm just going to, are they here?
I don't know.
Yeah. So when you look at the sensor, it does have a size guide on it. And this size guide says DCI and DCIP, okay? And which finger are we going to use, by the way? Here's another good education for you.
The finger of your non-dependent.
Yeah. How'd you know that?
I watched the video.
Oh. Did they send it? Did Zoll send a video? Or did you find it? That's cool.
Sent it out.
He sent it out. I don't know where it got
Oh, I'd love to see
Somebody
it.
sent it
Is
to
it
me
a
and said it was
ring
good,
finger
so I
of
sent it.
Was it a Masimo
And then
video
I
or a
didn't
Zoll
watch it.
video?
No, it's a guy doing this kind of a deal with the fire department.
Oh, that's kind of cool. I wonder which one it was. So, ring finger, dominant hand. You can use the middle finger and the index if you want. So, if somebody has really, really small fingers, go for the index finger because it's wider. What you don't want space on either side of the finger. So, this void needs to be filled, because if the void's not filled, that emitter light will go around the finger. The light escapes. The way it works is absorbance of light. There's 8 wavelengths of light. CO, we have, as a company, figured out which wavelengths of light get absorbed by carbon monoxide. So, if you have CO in your blood, those wavelengths of light get absorbed, and the detector at the bottom sees how much light comes through, and it does a mathematical formula and says this is your percent of CO. It's a tremendous mathematical formula at the back end. Trust me, it's not like super easy. But so if you have a finger that's teeny and light is going around the finger, it's escaping. If you have escaped light, it thinks you've got a higher level because it didn't see the light come through to the bottom. So remember, that can cause a pop. So this little size guide, you use your ring finger. If the finger goes all the way through, that's what this picture is, to the cuticle, which is right behind the nail, you use the smaller sensor. And that's for women, children, or males that have small fingers. It's very rare that the OEM groups who sell the monitors sell you both sensors. It jacks up the price of the equipment, and honestly, you should have both. They're very expensive, the sensors, but you can always ask Nate, what it would cost to add that. But remember, it's not just kids. So now we use the ring finger, non-dominant hand. The other thing that's really good is make sure the finger's all the way in the sensor to the very end. There's a stop tab. The reason is because the light, I'm going to turn it on. So you've got light, the emitter light. It's on. There we go. So the emitter light needs to be over the nail. So in order to line the emitter light over the nail, if you just kind of do that, it's not lined up, right? So you want to always put it all the way into the sensor. I can play with the camera because I know there's weird angles on these, right? I have GoPro too. So
that's all I use it for.
Yeah. There's a stop tab on the sensor, the little black thing at the end here. So, and my nail's fairly normal, okay? Now, if you have somebody, the other thing that can cause a false positive, do you know what club nails are? They're COPDers, right? The people, their nails grow round like this. They look like an upside down bowl. So think of light hitting that nail like that. That might give you a false number. So that can cause an issue. And then nail biters. Does anybody here bite their nails down to nothing? How do you silence this now?
Top right.
No idea.
This one? Okay. So nail biters. So if you've got a guy that has a no nail,
Sets this stuff up for me. I'll watch it.
do you know what I'm saying? And no one here has a no nail? No? Okay. So think of the light going through that little bitty nail, okay? This light emitter is fairly wide. It's pretty long. So what happens there is there's a bone here called the cuticle. It's not going through the nail, it's really going through this bone, and it's getting absorbed because that bone absorbs light. So it may give you a false positive. So I'm just giving you worst case scenario. It may or may not, but I'm just saying it could be so when I troubleshoot, when I get an alarm going off and there's no reason for that person to be CO poison, I'm looking at their nails. Maybe it's that. Maybe it's not the right finger size. Maybe it's motion. Pardon?
Painted nails.
Yeah. So you know what? It does pretty good with painted nails. It's not generally an issue. The way I know whether it's going through the polish is that perfusion index scale, which we'll try to turn on later. But PI, and I think Nate might do that for you. But PI is the amount of pulsable blood in your fingertip. It's basically perfusion. So it's telling me is the light, and if you don't have blood flowing through your, say you've got nail polish that's absorbing this light, your PI is going to be like 0. With SpO2, and those you're going to say, what do the numbers mean? So anything greater, so like anything less than 1 is low. It gives you a number. It starts at 0 and it goes to 20. I believe it's 20 is the highest. So, and like 10 or above is like superhero, wicked, great perfusion. Like I see guys that are 15, and I'll say, you never get cold fingers, right? And they always say, yes, I never get cold fingers. When I see people that are 1 or 2, I'll say, wow, you have Raynaud's? Are you cold in the wintertime? And they always say, my fingers are cold all the time. So this does work. And I have Raynaud's. My perfusion is usually 1 or less. I've got very poor circulation in my fingers. It doesn't mean I'm sick. It's not are you sick or not sick? It just means, hey, you have good perfusion or poor perfusion. I ski patrolled for a bunch of years in Maine, and I think I probably had frostbite, too, on a lot of my fingers. So tying ropes and things like that. Some of you guys are ski patrols, I assume, right? And I just can't do it anymore. I had to wear mitts taking a sled. That's not easy. Everyone, you don't have those leather gloves, you're not cool, right? So perfusion level can help you determine whether the light's going through the polish. Glitter might be an issue with reflective, but other than just normal polish is okay. Fake nails it will read through. Just make sure the real nail, even though the fake nail's on top of it, is under the light. You may have to somehow get that fake nail past that stop point because it sticks out. It's not going to read through something that's sticking out of the nail. That nail needs to be under that light. So 3 readings. We went over percents in the blood. We went over half-life. We went over treatment. We kind of went over symptoms. Let's just use one of you guys as a guinea pig. I'll use your ring finger, and let's see what kind of readings we get.
Let's give him a cigarette.
So much for the PowerPoint. It doesn't work. I don't. Sometimes they work. If it's a big crowd, the PowerPoint works better. So so SpO2 come up first. It's the quickest thing that's going to read. CO does take longer, and this is actually this bar that's going up and down is signal quality. It's actually the quality of the signal. So the higher that is, the better. Okay, so your CO is 0. See how it came up? It says CO 0%. Have any of you ever used this before with CO? This is your first time seeing it? Okay, so that's good. Now, go ahead and move your finger some. We're going to see the waveform. In the old days of pulse oximetry, when we saw artifact, we'd say don't rely on your readings. But Masimo reads through that. See, we can keep moving. Yeah, we're reading through that. So our SpO2 is not degrading. That's the benefit of our technique. So if you have any, it's going down a little bit, but it's not much.
Are you holding your breath?
Yeah.
No, now it degraded. So you did get it to fail. Okay. In most cases, it doesn't. You must have been, I don't know. More on that one later. But for the most part, we do a pretty good job. Like when I go to the doctor's office and they don't have Masimo, I do that all the time, and it fails immediately. So and they always look at it and say, "Oh my God, your SpO2 is 85." I'm like, "No, I'm just screwing with you." I mean, it's pretty resilient. Yeah. See, it's still holding there. All right. I was hoping the CO alarm would go off, but it won't. All right. So your perfusion level. I don't know how to get to that screen. Let me think. Let's do one more. So let's try you. And again, 0 to 5 is normal. There's a variance of plus or minus 3%. So I don't know if I mentioned that. I'd actually say almost 3 to 5% variance in accuracy, which is fine.
All day. I'm curious to see what mine is.
Yeah. Come on up to the front. All right. So you might a 4 or 5 could still be a 0. I know that sounds weird. I mean, the whole purpose of this is, hey, is this person poisoned or not poisoned? I get calls. People say, oh, the guy was 35 on the scene. We got to the hospital and he was like 20. I was like, what's wrong with your equipment? I said, nothing. It identified carbon monoxide. Who cares? It doesn't matter that it was 35 and in the hospital he was 20. For one thing, you had him on oxygen.
He's out of the environment, right?
He's out of the environment. You had him on oxygen. But even if they say, well, it wasn't exactly 90 minutes, I'm like, who cares? As long as it identified it, it did its job. And then they always say, oh, okay. We had a guy in Seattle. Actually, Seattle called us up. You're the guy that's been in the shop, huh?
I'm the guinea pig.
Okay.
It's at least a 1 here, right? Make sure this thing's working.
So we had a guy.
Casey, you're dead.
We can go put you by a running truck.
I breathe on this.
We had a guy in Seattle call us up and say we dragged a guy out of a fire that was unconscious, and his SpO2 was reading 97. What's wrong with your technology? He was like pissed off. So we're like, okay, well, did you ever think to measure his carbon monoxide level? They have the ability to measure it. And they said, oh, no. And he didn't understand that with hemoglobin that...
Winner.
There you go. Yeah, but that's still within the variance of accuracy, so you could still be 0. Even I am a little... you might be a little elevated, but that's not a very significant number. I have found people with high levels in classes. I found a fire chief that had a leak in his car. So these are the types of things that you'll find.
Was it drilled? Was it put there intentionally? Nice and clean.
Was the hose always
Yeah, that's a factory thing. Don't worry about that.
all over again.
It's an easy technology, but the training is really important. They have to understand nail side up, finger all the way in the probe, ring finger, use the proper sensor, things like that. And then also understand you may get false positives. Once that's kind of like, okay, we're good with that, I never hear any issues. when the technology first rolled out, we used to get a lot of calls. People say we got a false positive, but now people understand it, and it's rare that I get a call. And good training helps a lot. I get a lot of calls in Utah because the Zoll rep just doesn't do a good job down there. Oh, what's going on? No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, right. So remember, your SpO2 number is not going to understand the difference between oxygen and carboxyhemoglobin. It's going to see it as oxygen. So your levels will be normal or high, elevated. You may get 100 on somebody. Red skin is not an indication of carbon monoxide poisoning. It's an indication of death. It's a late sign. And remember, for fire safety, that it's important to measure it because you've got firefighters, and half the reason why you have this is for your own safety. CO does have direct affinity to heart disease. It's guilty by association for cancer and other things. And the science is getting uglier when you look at all this stuff. So, any questions so far? Anything? Yep.
If we go with the smaller
probe
attachment, you just break it loose there.
It's very easy.
So I understand if you use
The slender digit probe I was just talking about.
The pediatric one.
Yeah, but mainly anybody with small fingers. We use it on women. A lot of women have small fingers. They're really narrow. I mean, they'll go right through this hole. I basically use this. If the finger goes through here, use the appropriate sensor.
So
but if not, go to the index finger.
What would be the downside to using the smaller probe?
Good question. Yeah, on everyone.
Finger?
Well, okay.
So you don't have to have the two probes.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So like an agency, sometimes I get a call and they'll say, "Oh, we broke our full-size probe, but we do have this slender digit probe. Can we use it?" And we always say, "Yeah, use it." And generally, it works pretty well. The only issue is with a large finger and a small. It's narrower inside. It looks the same on the outside, but it's narrow in here. When you stuff a larger finger in a smaller probe, it puts pressure on the finger and degrades the accuracy on your SpO2 and things. It can actually degrade those numbers because it's designed very specifically for a certain position, but when the finger is squashed in there, there could be some inaccuracy. But honestly, between you and I, there's not a big disadvantage. I mean, if you said to me, should I go on those? This guy's question, well, should I use the small sensor or the large sensor? I'd use the small one. But because what you don't want is light escaping around the finger. And some women just have those really narrow fingers, and some guys have those really narrow fingers. Like I said, most of the monitors that I encounter, I'll only see this probe, and they'll look at this and say, "What is this?" It's not very clear. It shows you the finger going through. But what the heck is a DCI and what the heck is a DCIP? Who would know what that is? I mean, I would just say large and small is what I would say to make it simple. Anything else? Any other questions? Does it look like it's going to be a helpful tool for you? A lot in EMS, right? And this is on frontline. Are these on ambulances or engines or
ambulances?
Okay, great. And then the last thing that Nate will probably he can provide these for you is. Do you talk about the ear sensor ever? These
it hasn't been a super popular item just because of the expense, but I know it's super accurate. I know the accuracy is really, really good on it.
So like up here, you've got a lot of cold patients, and you get ski patrol bringing people down. And a lot of times you cannot get readings on their fingers. So when you can't get a reading on a finger, including CPR, you will get readings with this. I'm not guaranteeing it with compressions, but if you get ROSC, you're going to get readings. And this basically goes in the ear, not on the lobe. In. The lobe doesn't work. So that goes in the concha cava. It actually goes in here, okay? And like one's on the outside and one's on the inside kind of thing. There's a picture. And those are disposable. So when you get the really ugly trauma call at 2 in the morning and it's like 6 degrees outside, just go right to that. And then throw it away when you're done. You don't have to worry about cleaning it. Sometimes you can't get to their hands, especially if their hands are tied. Do you use auto CPR devices too?
No.
Okay. You have an auto CPR device on the mountain?
Yeah,
Wow.
thumper on the mountain.
Wow. That's cool. I've never heard of that. And would you put it in the sled?
Well, the bottle's
Air driven.
Bottle's usually at the bottom.
You don't hang on to it. The batteries were
Who makes it? Which one?
What was the brand of it? Do you remember? You guys remember?
Oh.
I don't know the brand. It's that
That's neat.
small air
Wow.
powered one.
Interesting. Okay. So, so that, and then the only other thing I had is that little bar that goes up and down. I always get this all confused. Like Zoll, we love Zoll because they display CO constantly. The physio device doesn't display it. It only displays it when it goes into an alarm, or if you scroll over and look for it. But that takes time. I'm sure you talk about that when you talk about monitors. Remember, it's right there. It's like there it is. But the bar that goes up and down always confuses me because physio has one, and I think yours is signal quality. Am I right? SIQ.
Pulse.
Is it but is it perfusion PI? Is it actually the PI or is it signal quality?
Yeah, it's a PI. It's a PI is the perfusion index that rotates as
The number.
carbon monoxide rotates.
Okay.
But my understanding, at least what I've been trained, and I can double check on
Yeah.
it, is that the meter that's up and down, that's the pleth wave. That's the pulse.
But it's not perfusion.
No.
So I think okay. So what it actually is the quality of the signal. We call it SIQ at Masimo. It's a Masimo vital sign that it's something we've sourced as Zoll, but it's your confidence. It's that bar going up and down. The higher, the better. The higher, the better the confidence. If it's actually the pleth though, the height of the pleth, then that would be perfusion. But you have your monitor. If you change it, I don't know how to do it, will display the perfusion number from 0 to 20. So you'll see that. I'm guessing it might be signal quality.
Right, and what's the number again if it's below 0.0?
If it's we will read, Masimo will read accurately with SpO2 down to 0.03, which is really low. I'm usually about a 0.03 myself. So that's what we're known for. That's 98% of our business is low perfusion pulse oximetry. For CO, you need greater than 1 because it needs a little bit more blood to get carbon monoxide. And it will read all the way up to 20. Most people are not going to be that level. But the importance of perfusion index is the trend. Where did this patient start and where did they end up? You're doing an auto extrication and they're starting out at this level and suddenly they're dropping. Their periphery shutting down. They're probably going into shock. The military uses it for tourniquets because you don't want any perfusion distal to the site, and they also use it for and the OR uses it for shock. The OR is big on perfusion because if they're in a stable environment. So if somebody's perfusion changes, there's a problem. It shouldn't change, and they may be bleeding. So but it takes a lot of education for guys to understand it. And does it flash back and forth between CO and PI then?
Yep.
So you don't want that to confuse somebody because then they'll think the PI number is the CO number. As long as you're educated and trained on PI, then I would probably use it and turn it on. But I wouldn't turn it on if not everybody got trained on it. That's how I look at it.
And we can make it different colors as well. So usually carbon monoxide is red,
Oh, cool.
and SpO2 is yellow, and then perfusion index could be like magenta, or there's like 8 different colors. But to his point, perfusion index, I mean, if the crews aren't going to really look at it, I mean, if they feel like the reading right, don't treat the patient, don't treat the monitor. If they don't feel like that's right, just have them switch it to a different finger. And I think Masimo recommends the ring finger because it has the least amount of calluses on it.
Right. It's least callous, better perfusion. Yeah. And we're going to get 3 readings, right, if we're suspicious? Okay. And then if there's any good things that come out of this, like you're going into winter now, so, I mean, if you do get a call where you actually identify CO, would you please let me know? Or let you know and you'll let me know, or let Nate know and he'll let me know, because we love hearing from you. And then if you have a problem, we also like to hear from you. I mean, feel free to call one of us and let us know. And that's really all I have. Yeah.
So I'm not sure I understand the 3 readings. Are you saying take it off, do it again?
Yeah. So take it off the finger, let it reset. It will alarm.
Okay.
You know, beep beep beep, and then just use a different finger.
Different
I try to use different finger. Different finger, different hand. You can go to the other hand. The non-dominant thing, since I used to work in the street, that would frustrate the heck out of me because I got so many things going on, and I'm talking to the patient about getting a history. It's like one less question I really want to ask him. But don't worry too much about that. I mean, really, and don't freak out if you use the index finger either. I mean, we're validated on all 3 fingers, but the ring finger is a better finger. But you know, if you're programmed to do it one way, I've been doing this 12 years, and I still sometimes go to the index finger. I'm just so used to it. It's so hard for me to change. Okay, but it is best. That's the ideal situation. But it's not the end of all. because I gave them these. These are actually for the rads, but you can use these on the Zolls because it's the exact same information.
Yeah, people love those.
They love these, right? So I gave them 6. There's 3 here, and I guess there's 3 monitors somewhere else.
Gotcha.
Feel free to somehow maybe put them in or attach them. You can attach them to the cord or something. And it does show the 3 fingers. Any other questions on CO or SpO2? Okay. All right. Phil, thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right. Stop. Or are you just going to run through the whole thing?
No, I'm going to do two
you got 3
different.
different segments.
Yeah.
Heart deuce.
So most likely we'll see you tomorrow then.